Hey, so as I delve deeper into Christianity, my Christianity, I have a lot of unanswered questions, you know, particularly to do with the Bible, to reconciling the Christian point of view with all that we know about the world. And one of the things that I want to do more of is kind of breaking down my troubles with reading the Bible, the questions that I have, and exploring the answers with you guys. Because there's a lot of stuff that just makes me scratch my head in a puzzled nature. That kind of frustrates me. And when I have an unanswered question, I just want the answer. So just to start off with, I'm reading the Bible at the moment, and I've barely even gotten off the first page. I've pretty much read most of the Bible. I've listened to it, but I'm starting again, and I've finally got myself a proper big old fat study Bible just to understand all this stuff. And I haven't even made it off the first page, really. Still in Genesis chapter 1, and just about to read through just starting chapter 2. But one thing I noticed is that in Genesis chapter 1, it basically gives an introductory account of the 7 days of creation. A very high level overview, not of how God created the world, but just the telling that he did and what he did. Near the end of chapter 1, it says ultimately that God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. He then goes on to say, well, the author of this book, Moses, goes on to say, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food, and to all the beasts of the earth, blah, 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 I give to you, for you to kind of have, speaking to the humans to be, which is great. And then obviously on the seventh day, God rests. But then as we move into chapter 2, after it tells you that on the seventh day God rests, it says that this is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created, when the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. Now no shrub had yet appeared on the earth, and no plant had yet sprung up, for the Lord God had not sent rain on the earth, and there was no one to work the ground. And I was confused, because didn't they just tell us that God had created all of the plant life for humans? So is there a contradiction there? And I got confused, because just in chapter 2, straight away, I was like, well, that doesn't make sense. If you've already told us there's plants on the earth and you've made humans, why are we saying now there's no shrubs or plants on the earth? What I've realized is that first chapter is just telling you a very high level overview of what happened in creation. It's a different literary style to even the second chapter and the the kind of pursuing next chapters in the Bible, in Genesis. But that chapter 2, when it's talking about how no shrubs and plants had yet sprung up, it's zooming in on one particular area of God's creation. So the first chapter is the high-level overview, telling you what sort of happened in a broad sort of stroke. And then chapter 2 is zooming in. So they're not contradictory, they're complementary. And I actually use ChatGPT a lot when I have questions, and it's so helpful. It's honestly like my little sidekick, my little study sidekick, my little C3PO, if you will. I asked it, in Genesis chapter 2, it says that no shrub had yet appeared on earth, but in chapter 1, it says that God created plants and the earth. Is that a contradiction? Goes on to say, the passage in Genesis 1 and 2 can appear contradictory if read without considering the different contexts and literary styles in which they were written. Let's take a look at these chapters. Blah, blah, blah. Genesis 1, let the land produce vegetation, blah, blah, blah. Genesis 2, now no shrub had yet appeared on the earth, no plant had sprung up. The explanation to that is Genesis 1 provides an overview of the entire creation process, describing it in a systematic day-by-day sequence. This chapter gives a general account of God creating the world, including the creation of vegetation on the third day. Genesis chapter 2 zooms in on the creation of humans and the specific conditions of the Garden of Eden. It provides additional details that complement the broader account in Genesis 1. The key to resolving the apparent contradiction is understanding that Genesis 2, verse 4 to 5, is not describing the world before the creation of plants in general, but rather the specific conditions of the earth before the Garden of Eden was planted and before humanity was created to cultivate it. And then it goes on to tell me the literary style of each of these chapters. And that's one of the hugest things, which I'll get to in a second, about interpreting the Bible properly and how there's often so much confusion and apparent contradiction. One of the reasons comes down to the literary style, but Genesis 1 is written in a more structured, poetic form, intended to provide a majestic overview of the creation process. Genesis 2 is more narrative and focuses on the relationship between humans and their environment. And then it just gives a conclusion. These two chapters serve different purposes of providing different perspectives on the same overarching event of creation. Rather than being contradictory, they are complementary, each highlighting different aspects of God's creative work. So I got confused because, I thought it's just following on in a sequential fashion. But the main crux of this and what I've kind of just learned is how important it is to, one, understand context, to really understand the chapter that you're reading, the context of it, and importantly, the literary style. Is it poetic? Is it a narrative story? Is it a first-person account? Is it a song? Is it a parable? Is it metaphorical? Is it a recording of history? All of these different ways of writing mean you have to interpret them in different ways. You don't take the literal meaning of a poem. I'm trying to think of an example. He flung his hook into the sea and pulled out nothing but a stinging bee. You know, I mean, you take a poem at its metaphorical value, and then you take a historical record at like factual, at a factual basis. It's the style of the writing that matters, that affects our interpretation. So even, you know, I thought like, okay, yeah, that's cool. Each book, as in Genesis, as in Exodus, as in Psalms, whatever book you want to read, I thought that each book had a literary style, but even within each book, each chapter sometimes has a literary style. So Genesis chapter 1 is more of a high level, as this mentions, kind of poetic overview of creation. And then Genesis 2 is zoomed in more at a micro level and provides an account of the creation of mankind and what that actually looked like. So they can go hand in hand. And a lot of, I mean, I'm very much learning, but I'm assuming a lot of the Bible is like that and is complementary. I mean, it probably wouldn't all still be in one piece if it wasn't. So yeah, that's just what I wanted to say. Learning for me, I mean, is understanding what are we reading here? What's the author trying to get at? What's the structure of the writing? What's the style? What's the context? It's super important as to how we actually interpret things, and I think that's where a lot of people go wrong. You can't really take all this at face value, which is frustrating because I mean, it requires so much more in-depth kind of analysis. But I mean, that's half the fun. This is a living, breathing, dynamic book. It's always got something new to tell you. So, you know, that's cool. I was going to say something else. Yeah. That's annoying. I've forgotten what I was going to say. But yeah, I mean, that's what I want to do. I want to break down these issues that I have, these questions that I have, and answer them in real time so that we can come to understand this thing and overcome objections and overcome doubts and get to the heart of the truth here. And not be swayed by opinions. That's what I was going to say. Two things. It is frustrating that if you want to go deeper, maybe to really understand things, you know, it requires a lot of engagement, this Bible and Christianity in general. But in saying that, there's different levels. Some people are quite satisfied having a more kind of non-intellectual faith, and there's huge merit to that, and I think we all need to have that, ultimately, that submission to something higher, even when we don't understand it, because we never ultimately fully will, but this gives us a guide. And then for some people, maybe people who think a bit more critically, or who are just kind of a bit hungrier for answers, you can explore it in more detail. So it's maybe frustrating, but it's also a good thing. And yeah, I mean, learning for me is just understanding the different kinds of literary styles. What is a poem? What actually makes a poem a poem? How do we recognize a poem? What makes historical accounts? What makes a narrative, piece of writing a narrative? What makes a song a song? What makes a metaphor? What makes a parable? You know, learning what these different structures are so that I can then orient myself to identifying them, being able to read them for what they are, understand it in the way it was intended to be understood, and have that be complementary with the rest of my readings, so that I'm not just reading the whole Bible at face value and being so confused, wondering what that means, wondering what this is. How does that work with that? So yeah, first page in when you already got questions, it's a great sign.